Hi, everyone. Well, we're 9 days into 2025 and things have started happening already. Um, for example, I think a lot of us can feel a sea change has come in around gender ideology. It's starting to show the cracks quite a bit, and which is really good. We've got more people speaking out, feeling freer to speak out. We just had the news, I think it was yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg, if that's how you say his name, announcing that Facebook was going to have fewer um, fact checkers in place. And fact checkers sound like a fairly innocuous sort of thing, but in fact, they were biased fact checkers, and they were suppressing freedom. They were suppressing speech and expression on Facebook more than they were helping it stay safe. And that was the opinion of a lot of people. We understood that the safety element was a concern, which was why they implemented this fact checking. But in fact, it was suppression of speech and expression. And so that's gone now. So there is a loosening up of this left-wing authoritarianism. And as an old lefty myself, I'm still sort of tend to, although I call myself centrist now, I still tend to sort of lean a little bit to the left. But the authoritarianism that we saw uh, being created there and being enacted more and more was a real concern. So it's really good to start seeing some freeing up of some of these repressions. So this year, so far, I've appeared on two other podcasts. One with Di Landy from Manawahine Kuriro, and one with Jill Ovens with Simon Anderson as the host. And the one with Di Landy, I didn't say, that was with a UK woman called Kelly Dougal. And both of these I will put onto my Substack when they get published, for anyone else to listen to if they want to. So anyway, this particular podcast is actually for the purpose of doing a readout of the roundup for 2024 from my blogs. And this is just from my blogs. So there will be some things that I'm not talking about, which have still happened. And a lot of these things can be read on the Women's Rights Party website, and they have actually now started a Substack as well. They write about a lot of the issues as well. But for these are just from my Substack, which I've written myself. So I shall just find that, and I'll be reading it out. I can't just ad-lib it. So here we go. Either a lot more has happened this year around gender ideology here in New Zealand, or I've just written a lot more. I've published 85 blog pieces in all, including those which have been in the form of intros to YouTube videos or articles written by others. I think a number of us TERFs and TERF supporters increased our networking this year, which created more awareness of issues as well as activity. Here's a précis of the goings-on in 2024 taken from my blog, which admittedly isn't a short read, but I've made headings on each section so you can skip through and decide on what does and doesn't take your interest. And I have included links all throughout this, so the link to the Substack blog will be in the description if you want to go and check it out and drill down into any of the links. Okay, number one, the T-shirt which said men are not women even if you squint. 2024 kicked off with a Māori woman elder, Philippa, being kicked out of a small town supermarket for wearing a T-shirt which said men are not women even if you squint. The T-shirt agitated a male pretend woman staff member behind the lotto counter, and he was surly and rude towards Philippa as she was buying a lotto ticket on her way home from work. Philippa, not unreasonably, made her objection to his behaviour known, whereby the staff member escalated his umbrage. This alerted the manager, as it was likely intended to, who brusquely evicted Philippa and trespassed her from the store for 2 years. When the incident went public, he and the staff member spun a version of the story which unsurprisingly conflicted with Philippa's version. The manager's behaviour does beg the question, has he ever evicted and trespassed a bloke from his store for wearing what a female staff member deemed to be an offensive T-shirt? Philippa's T-shirt can't possibly have been the first one worn in the store which was ever considered to have come into their category of offensive. Understandably, Philippa was shaken by what had happened, but eventually began proceedings to get the trespass order lifted, so she didn't have to travel another 30 minutes to the next nearest supermarket. However, she was stonewalled and unable to make progress with that. A couple of months later, Philippa spoke about the incident on Reality Check Radio. Number 2, the challenge to the wording of the Midwifery Council's scope of practice. We stepped up our challenge to New Zealand's Midwifery Council about them ditching the words mother, woman and baby from their initial revised scope of practice. They did this in favour of using what is commonly, but erroneously, called inclusive language. I prefer to call it amorphous blob language for its lack of definition. This amorphous blob language included liberally using Māori words in the English language version of the scope of practice, even though a Māori language version had also been created. Māori women's group Manawahine Korero rejected the way the Māori words were used in both scopes, saying that many were used out of context or were dodgy translations and therefore didn't make enough sense. Midwife Deb Hayes started a parliamentary petition against the initial revised scope of practice after the Midwifery Council ignored an overwhelming rejection of it via a public consultation process. The Council was determined to proceed with it in the form they liked, but which the public didn't. The petition gained nearly 7,500 signatures, a lot for New Zealand, and was presented to Parliament by National MP James Meagher. Written submissions were then made to the Parliament Petitions Committee, and from those submissions, only Deb Hayes and Manawahine Korero were invited to make oral presentations to the committee in September to state our case, as was the Midwifery Council. In an extraordinary and never explained move, the Petitions Committee decided to withhold the video of Manawahine Korero's presentation from public access. Reality Check Radio subsequently invited the presentation to be read on air with them. Prior to making their oral presentation to the Petitions Committee, the Midwifery Council made what appeared to be some grudging last-minute changes to the revised scope of practice. These were perfunctory at best, and the revised scope remains unsatisfactory. No decision has yet been made by the Petitions Committee about the language used in the revised scope, but the Midwifery Council is proceeding with its implementation regardless. However, the challenge to it remains active as well. Sarah Henderson talks with Paul Brennan on Reality Check Radio about it. And just as a note, Reality Check Radio is one of the alternative media here in New Zealand. One of the very few willing to give a voice to gender critical women or anyone who doesn't go along with the mainstream, let's say, woke narrative. And as another aside, the Midwifery Council, just to note, is a different body to the College of Midwives. Number 3, Health New Zealand continues to be afraid of using the word woman. How many ways can a health body make their messaging about menstruation incomprehensible? Health New Zealand has mastered the art of that. It stays determined to not use the word woman when gobbledygook will do. Neither do they like using that icky word when talking about pregnancy, preferring the sanitized word people instead. In effect, they and others who won't give woman definition veil woman with their amorphous, let me read that again, they veil woman with their amorphous blob language. They're under some sad misapprehension, cleverly sold to them by overly influential TQ plus lobbyists, that it makes everyone happy. However, there is at least one secret place in New Zealand where the health provider either doesn't know that the word woman is forbidden or doesn't care. 4, other organisations still enthralled to gender ideology. In particular, the Association of Psychotherapists Aotearoa New Zealand, APANS is their acronym, came to my attention. To put it in a nutshell, they issued a completely bonkers position statement on how all therapists registered with them have to believe any patient who says they're the opposite sex to that which they were born, or any gender they say they are, no questions asked. Like me, you might have thought that asking questions is what therapists do. However, it seems that some questions can be put on the naughty list, as can the therapists who ask them, for no other reason than a personal ideological belief held by those on the APANS Council. I've written more about this here, and here is a link, in which I include links to a legal opinion and advice for therapists given by 2 lawyers at the, in brackets, Rebel, Children's and Adolescents Therapists Association Conference in 2022, after the conversion prohibition bill was passed into law. The Ministry for Children also appears to show a preference for transitioning rainbow children and young people to their opposite natal sex, and foster care and children's homes may be in breach of the ministry's policies if they don't. 5. Christchurch's anti-woman equity and inclusion policy. The Christchurch City Council continued to erode women's and girls' rights by implementing an overarching equity and inclusion policy in March. The policy lists the categories it serves, including gender, but doesn't have the word sex in it. This means it will be difficult, if not impossible, to apply S46 of the Human Rights Act in council-owned venues for women and girls, which allows for the provision of single-sex spaces. Effectively, the equity and inclusion policy is the final nail in the coffin of putting the control of women's and girls' spaces into the hands of men. All a man has to do is claim a woman gender identity, and he gets into all female spaces in council-owned venues. No amount of reasoning could persuade the councillors who were driving this policy to include the word sex, which was abundantly evident during the council meeting where it was voted on and subsequently passed. Prior to that meeting, I had sent all the councillors an email, bar the 3 driving the policy, outlining the concerns with excluding the word sex from the policy. During that meeting, 2 councillors raised those concerns to the council, and Councillor Sarah Templeton, who led the drive to implement this policy, was asked to address them. She said the advice received was that although sex and gender are not the same, the 2 can still be used interchangeably, like the Human Rights Commission does. As an aside, the Human Rights Commission has been an abysmal pit of wokery, but now has a new commissioner who is reputed not to be of that ilk. Fingers crossed. However, getting back to the equity and inclusion policy, it appeared that Councillor Templeton was not bothered about clarity. She is happy to conflate sex and gender, even though the word gender is now used to mean a number of things, including gender identity or gender expression. It isn't defined in any way in the policy about how it's being used there. She went on to say that our rainbow community, especially those who are transgender, are some of the most vulnerable and victimized in our community. They deserve our support and deserve to be included in all the different activities we are able to provide as a council. For such a vulnerable and victimized group, they sure have a lot of power within councils, organisations, and amongst politicians. It's obvious that Councillor Templeton considered including the word sex in the policy to be a threat to men who say they're women from having unchallenged access to female spaces and council-owned venues, as it might be able to contest gender. If that wasn't the case, what was the harm of adding it in? So now women and girls in Christchurch are not entitled to any man-free communal female spaces or swim sessions in council-owned venues. If they encounter a man in one, they are burdened with the anxiety, whether large or minimal, of having to second-guess his motives and staying aware of him. This is likely to be the same in many cities and towns across New Zealand. Number 6, are we going to put gender into law? Even though the word gender isn't suitable to use if we want clarity in policy and legislation, the Law Commission has revisited the idea of putting it into the Human Rights Act. In June, they published a 211-page issues paper justifying their argument that the Human Rights Act needs to be changed to include, quote, people who are transgender, people who are non-binary, and people with innate variations of sex characteristics. For the most part, it read as though it had been written by recently qualified students who had been indoctrinated with gender ideology at uni. Public submissions about this were invited, and I went to Wellington as part of the combined Women's Rights Party and Manawahine Kuriro delegation to make ours in person, which are included in my blog piece here. There are multiple issues with the issues paper, not to mention the very concept of putting gender into law and the misunderstandings and confusion that will create. A decision on this has not yet been made public, but our Supreme Court has already referred to an adult male child rapist as she, her. Number 7, Sal Grover. Aussie woman Sal Grover, she of the Tickle v Giggle court case, also made a virtual presentation to the Law Commission to help reiterate the importance of keeping the word gender out of law, using her own experience as the example of why. Prior to that, in late June, she visited New Zealand on a public speaking tour about that experience to demonstrate how easily gender in law can play out in a negative way. One venue in New Plymouth cancelled the room booking made for her talk, and attempts were made to get her cancelled in Wellington. The second attempt failed due to a canny manoeuvre, if I didn't say that word correctly the first time, due to a canny manoeuvre by the Women's Rights Party, who brought Sal here in conjunction with Helen Houghton, the leader of the new Conservative Party. The events in other places, including Christchurch, went without a hitch. In addition to her public appearances, I had a chinwag with Sal on my YouTube channel shortly after she arrived in New Zealand, and later on, Helen and I talked on Reality Check Radio with Paul Brennan about the Christchurch event, and how the mood of the audience has changed compared to a few years ago. Number 8, 2 stories from women in the prison system and disturbing social media content. I was privileged to be trusted with the stories of 2 women's past unpleasant experiences with men who say they're women in New Zealand women's prisons. One is an ex-prison officer, the other an ex-inmate who has since been exonerated of the historic charges against her. Men who say they're women are in prison for New Zealand for sexual offences at around twice the rate of other men, and there is no evidence that they suffer unduly from being offended against as frequently claimed. Conversely, it's not uncommon to discover that men who say they're women have disturbing social media content, such as that of an Auckland University of Technology lecturer or recent lecturer, which was reported on by Redux. Number 9, cancelling a fundraising recipe book. Even a worthy cause couldn't survive cancel culture in February this year, which is February 2024, of course, when Wardini Books in Hawke's Bay decided it would rather be woke than help people in need. It turfed a fundraising recipe book out of its store. Jane Morgan compiled the Dinner Club recipe book to help raise funds to feed people in cyclone-ravaged Hawke's Bay, which only Wardini's stocked at the time. Then it banned her book from the store due to her supposedly being anti-Māori and anti-trans, not realising that Jane's mother was Māori. The book is very well done. I have one and it is still available in the link above or by email. And I've included the email address here, which is the Dinner Club, all one word, -hb@mail.com. Another wee drink. Number 10, haranguing the Let Kids Be Kids roadshow. Kiwis go toe-to-toe with their kids' school, and a comedian cancellation. In keeping with the theme of being cancelled, the group Let Kids Be Kids, who advocate against age-inappropriate sex and gender ideology content in the Ministry of Education's Relationships and Sexuality Guidelines for Schools, also got harassed and had venues cancel bookings during their South Island roadshow in April. I chatted with Penny Marie from Let Kids Be Kids on my YouTube channel here. I also have a chat on my YouTube channel with 2 ordinary Kiwis who went toe-to-toe with their kids' school over the same inappropriate content and the guidelines which had been incorporated into the curriculum. And stand-up comedian Sasha Jones talks about her cancellation for being gender critical, also with me on my YouTube channel. Number 11, the Unsilenced event. A few blokes got together and created an event in May called Unsilenced. Its purpose was to allow those critical of gender ideology who had previously been silenced by all the usual culprits a chance to speak. It was a huge success, but also stirred up huge controversy, of course. The organisers secured the flash new council-owned event centre in Wellington to hold it in, due to a fortuitous piece of good luck. That made one particular councillor, Sa, and he proceeded to rile up as many others about it as he could, both inside and outside the council, which culminated in a protest outside the venue on the day. The venue itself engaged in petty acts of sabotage, which included withholding soap from some of the dispensers and toilet paper from some of the cubicles in the women's toilets. At 9 p.m. the evening before the event, the venue manager rang one of the organisers and said there'd been a miscommunication and video equipment wouldn't be part of the hire contract after all. Some urgent action got an independent videographer there the next morning. The venue demanded excessive security costs. Security was eventually provided privately, free of charge. The cafe area in the venue, which was managed by an independent contractor, shut themselves down for the day, apparently in solidarity with the trans community. Event attendees had to go outside the venue for food and drink. The few staff on duty were surly and unhelpful towards a disabled woman who asked how to get up to the first floor where the event room was. But despite the attempts at derailment, it was magnificent. The speeches can be accessed here. 12. Puberty blockers. The Ministry of Health was due to release a review of New Zealand's use of puberty blockers a few months before the release of the UK's CAS review in April. However, it waited to analyse that before considering whether or not to release theirs. Compared to the UK's usage prior to the restrictions put on puberty blockers there, New Zealand was issuing 10 times more per head of population. After analysing the CAS review, our Ministry of Health decided to further pause their release. Something tells me that we might have narrowly escaped a Ministry of Health full steam ahead recommendation, which undoubtedly would have been strongly encouraged by TQ plus lobbyists. After dragging the chain for 7 more months, the Ministry of Health issued a media release in November about their decision to hold a public consultation on the matter. The media release contains links to their position statement and evidence brief. The public consultation closes on 20th of January 2025. In general, the Ministry of Health's response has been considered weak, and that TQ plus lobbyists appear to still have an outsized influence on the ministry. Veteran journo Yvonne van Dongen gives a rundown on the views about it from some significant gender-critical groups and individuals, and Jill Ovens gives a Women's Rights Party view here. Also, Simon Tegg from GenSpect New Zealand wrote a powerful open letter to the Health Minister, Dr. Shane Reti, where he shoots down any credibility that WPATH, World Profession Association of Transgender Care, and PAFA, Professional Association of Transgender Care, Healthcare Aotearoa, might still have had in regards to puberty blockers. 13. Transgender sports guidelines to be reviewed. Safe Women's Sports Australasia, and for those who aren't familiar with the word Australasia, it's mostly used to mean Australia and New Zealand combined, although technically it includes a little bit more than that. So Safe Women's Sports Australasia presented an open letter to Sport and Recreation Minister Chris Bishop in September, which was signed by 59 former elite and Olympian athletes, requesting him to protect female sports. Mr. Bishop has since asked Sports New Zealand to review and update its guiding principles for the inclusion of transgender people in community sport. No updates to this have been received so far. Number 14, and I think I did 17 points. Just a second and I'll have a look. Yes, 18 points. Right, number 14. One woman's challenge to the rainbowing of her local library. In a small town in New Zealand, a local woman noticed that the library was rainbowing itself up, and rightfully she considered that to be wrong. Libraries should be havens of impartiality where everyone can rub shoulders together and not places where any bias is on permanent display. Although those responsible for rainbowing our organisations are usually determined rainbowees, they should still be challenged. I take my hat off to Paula, not her real name. This is her story. And that is in the link provided, obviously. Number 15, tomato juice man gets convicted and discharged. The man in a pink dress who threw tomato juice over Kelly J. Keane at the Let Women Speak rally in Auckland in March 2023 was convicted and discharged for it in September. He has since applied twice to have the conviction overturned, but denied it each time. And better luck, Chanel Lau, the man who was highly influential in whipping up the violence against Kelly J. Keane and the Let Women Speak rally attendees, got given a job with a Labour MP and within the Labour Party itself. Clearly, it pays to be their pet. Number 16. A protest in solidarity against Germany's draconian sex self-ID law. I took myself off to Wellington again in November to be part of the Women's Rights Party protest in solidarity with German women against their sex self-ID law. It's a brutal law where any person who hurts the feelings of another by misgendering or dead-naming them can be fined up to 10,000 euros. The Women's Rights Party hung banners over the motorway and protested outside the German embassy alongside those from other groups. Number 17, journos on our side. This year, we were lucky to have a couple of respected long-time journalists, Yvonne van Dongen and Graham Adams, writing more about gender ideology issues. Other journalists still remain either afraid, unconcerned, flirt with it a little here and there at best, or are hostilely woke. Yvonne, who now has her own Substack, published 4 articles in 2024 pertaining to gender ideology and one about women's well-being. So those 4 articles were the charity industrial complex, and my description is it's about racketeering by charities in which, needless to say, the neo-rainbow racket features significantly. Number 2, so proud. How much taxpayers are funding neo-rainbow events? Number 3, would you vote for this? How New Zealand's liberal prostitution legislation is not really working out that well. Number 4, the plot sickens. A précis on what relevant groups and individuals have to say about the Ministry of Health's public consultation on puberty blockers. And number 5, I said 4, didn't I? She actually has done 5 because this one here, the last one, is the first one she's put on her own Substack. It's called Moment of Truth, 2025 Gender Critical Predictions for New Zealand. And that's pretty much all in the title. And Graham Adams, he's published 3. One is called Puberty Blocker Usage Surges in New Zealand, and he actually published this in mid-2023, but I thought it was relevant to 2024 as well. A follow-up article after Professor Charlotte Paul's article in the December edition of North and South magazine about New Zealand's scandalously high use of puberty blockers. Graham puzzles over the mainstream's media almost total disregard of this. Number 2, New Zealand's trans lobby is fighting a rearguard action. And that's about the reaction in New Zealand to the Cass review. And number 3, man gives birth doco requires major denial of reality. A woman who says she's a man has a baby with a man, and the documentary tries to sell it as a man having a baby, which you can understand is complete nonsense, and Graham writes about that very well. So there are the main events as published in my blog. So we will see what 2025, find me again, see what 2025 brings. But as I said, it's already seems to be starting off quite quickly. And this year, I really want to see more collaboration on the things that we agree on. And I realize that when we collaborate with groups and people, there will be some things that we will not agree with them on. But if we can overcome that and within reason, and collaborate on the things that we do agree on, then I think that 2025 will give us much more visibility. And as I said before, we can already feel a sea change coming on. So if we combine that with much more visibility, I think that we will be able to start making some more inroads into prizing out some of this gender ideology from policies. Okay, so that's it for this time, and I will see you again a bit later. Bye.